On the day my divorce was finalized, I packed up everything I owned to leave for Paris. Meanwhile, my ex-husband was busy marrying his secretary in the wedding of the century. The entire Sterling family thought I was leaving empty-handed. Little did they know, the person officiating the ceremony would look at the bride and utter a single sentence that would cause his world to collapse, right? Then and there. I stared at the divorce settlement that had just gone into effect. The edges of the paper crinkled and slightly torn by my ice-cold hands. On the glowing screen of my phone, resting next to my hospital pillow, the live stream of my ex-husband's wedding was playing. I was analyzing every single frame. The five-star hotel in the heart of Manhattan was lit up like a royal palace. White, roses blanketing the aisles, crystal chandeliers casting a golden glow over the altar. And right in the center of it all, Hunter Sterling, the man I had called my husband for 5 years, was holding the hand of his secretary, Brooke Newman, stepping up to the altar amidst thunderous applause. I lay in the hospital bed, an IV line still taped to the back of my hand. My lower abdomen throbbed with a dull, hollow ache, as if someone had placed a glacimentever block of ice deep inside me. 3 days ago, I lost our unborn child. 3 days later, the father of that child, dressed in a custom black tuxedo with a collar and H-in, boutonniere pinned to his lapel, was bowing his head to slip a ring onto another woman's finger. People say that when a woman reaches the absolute limits of her, pain, she cries. But in that moment, I couldn't shed a single tear. My throat was parched, my eyes burned, and my heart felt as though it had been violently scooped out, leaving a terrifying void. The door to the hospital room swung open, and a nurse walked in, holding an ivory gold-embossed envelope. "Miss Hayes, someone dropped this off for you. They said it's a gift from the Sterling family." I looked at the thick, luxurious envelope and spontaneously let out a laugh. It sounded so hoarse that even I found it unfamiliar. "Just leave it there, please." The nurse hesitated. "You just had surgery. The doctor said you shouldn't get overly emotional." I nodded, but the moment she left, I reached out and took the envelope. Inside was a heavy card with gold foil lettering. "Hunter Sterling and Brooke Newman. Joyfully invite you." Tucked inside was a small handwritten note. The cursive was soft and meticulously crafted, the handwriting of a woman who knew exactly how to play the innocent victim in front of men. "Maya, thank you for letting him go. Hunter told me that over the last 5 years, his biggest regret was ever marrying you." I read that sentence 3 times. Every word was like a needle driven straight into my chest. 5 years. 5 years of staying up late waiting for him to come home from the office. 5 years of swallowing the insults from my mother-in-law. 5 years of hiding my true identity, hiding my Ivy League MBA, hiding my self-respect just to be the submissive, obedient wife in his eyes. And in the end, all it bought me was a single word: regret. My phone vibrated against the mattress. I thought it was another mocking text from Brooke, but it was a notification from my banking app. Incoming wire transfer, $4,500,000,000. Available balance, $4,500,000,000. I stared at that chillingly long string of numbers, and the corners of my mouth slowly curled upward. On the exact day I was thrown away, the legal procedures for inheriting my grandfather's estate were finally complete. My grandfather, Richard Hayes, the man who built Providence Holdings from nothing, had left me. His shares, luxury real estate, a chain of boutique hotels, and an entire investment portfolio spanning from Aspen to Miami to Maui. My mother was his only daughter. Years ago, she ran away with my father, enraging my grandfather so much that he cut off all contact. After a car accident took both my parents' lives, I was put into the foster care system in New Jersey. It wasn't until I turned 18 that my grandfather's people finally tracked me down, but by then, I had already met Hunter. I had been foolish enough to believe that love could conquer everything. For the past 5 years, the Sterling family thought I was just some orphaned girl with nowhere to turn. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, once pointed right at my face during a society dinner. "A girl like you stepping into this. Family is the luck of 3 lifetimes. Don't think marrying into wealth makes you a swan." And Hunter, the man I had loved blindly, had coldly told me, "I don't like overly ambitious women. My wife just needs to be agreeable and know how to maintain my image. Because of that one sentence, I locked my master's degree in a drawer. Because of that sentence, I turned down the board seat at my grandfather's firm. Because of that sentence, I confined myself to the maid's quarters off the kitchen in the Sterling penthouse cooking, laundering his shirts, waiting on his mother, hosting his clients, smiling on cue, and staying silent when required. I had personally broken my own wings just to make a mediocre man feel like a giant. From the phone screen, the wedding officiant's voice echoed. I now ask the groom to place the ring on the bride's finger. Hunter looked down, gently holding Brooke's hand. His face lit up with an affection I had never received. On our wedding day at the courthouse, he hadn't even looked at me for more than 3 seconds. My wedding ring was a thin, silver band his mother had picked up at a random jeweler. He had told me, "We're only getting married because my grandfather insisted on me settling down. Let's not make a big deal out of it." I touched my ring finger. The old indentation was so faded it was barely visible. Just like our marriage, I thought it existed, but it turned out I was the only one who believed it was real. I dialed my grandfather's personal attorney. He picked up immediately. "Miss Hayes, I was just about to call you. The entire inheritance transfer is complete." "I know, Charles. I need you to do 3 things for me. Name them." "First, arrange a car to get me out of this hospital today. I'm heading up to the Hudson Valley estate tonight. But your health, I'm not dead yet." Silence on the other end. I looked at the man on my screen, smiling blissfully, at his new wedding, and continued. "Second, use 7 different shell investment firms to start aggressively buying up floating shares of Sterling Enterprises. Don't worry about the cost. In a month, I want my name on the board of major shareholders with voting power." Charles lowered his voice. "You want to attack the Sterling family? I'm not attacking anyone. I'm just taking back what they are about to lose. And the third thing?" I picked up the heavy wedding invitation, staring at the gold foil lettering, my heart as cold as ice. Investigate Brooke Newman. Her hometown, family, education, ex-boyfriends, prenatal clinic records, bank accounts, everything. I want to know exactly how pure the woman Hunter married today really is. Charles paused for a few seconds before replying, "Understood. I'll have my team on it immediately." The moment I hung up, my phone rang again. Hunter Sterling. That name used to make my heart flutter just from a missed call. Now, looking at it only made me want to laugh. I answered but didn't say a word. His voice came through, mixed with the loud, celebratory wedding music in the background. "Maya, you got the invitation, right? Brooke is too kind-hearted, that's why she wanted to send it to you. But if you ask me, you don't need to show up. I divorced. Don't interfere with my life anymore." I leaned back against the hospital bed, calmly asking, "Hunter, do you remember when I called you 3 days ago?" He scoffed. "You called to put on a pathetic act to get me back, right?" "Maya, drop the pity routine. I was in the hospital. I lost our baby." Dead silence on the other end. 3 seconds, 5 seconds. Then his tone turned. Harsh. "What kind of nonsense are you spouting? You and I haven't been a real husband and wife for a long time. Where would you even get a baby?" I closed my eyes. My throat was tight, but my voice remained terrifyingly steady. "We did. That night you came home drunk, held me, but called out Brooke's name. It was just that once. But the baby is gone. It died on the Bosley operating table while you were out picking wedding dresses with her." "Maya, you're insane." "Maybe I am." I looked at the gray skies outside the hospital window. Manhattan traffic was gridlocked this afternoon. The world was still as loud and chaotic as if a piece of my soul hadn't just died. "Hunter, enjoy your honeymoon. What are you planning to do?" I smiled, a single tear finally falling, though I quickly wiped it away. "I've already prepared your wedding gift. I hope you and your new bride love it." I hung up. I ripped the IV needle from my hand, put on the loose cashmere dress I had packed in my bag, threw a coat over my shoulders, and walked out of the bag. Room. The nurse ran after me, calling my name, but I didn't turn back. Down in the hospital lobby, a few people were clustered around a TV showing the Slashin' and 5 Lit live stream of Hunter's society wedding. When they recognized me, they fell, silent, their eyes darting away awkwardly, as if they had just witnessed a dirty secret. I walked right past them and out the sliding doors. Charles's black SUV was waiting. Before getting in, I looked back at the city where I had lost 5 years of my youth, lost a child, and lost the softest version of myself. The driver asked quietly, "Where to, ma'am?" I placed the divorce papers, the wedding invitation, and my phone still playing. The live stream on the seat next to me. On the screen, Hunter had his arm around Brooke's waist, raising a champagne glass to hundreds of guests. I stared. Straight ahead, my voice hoarse but enunciating every word. To the Hudson Valley. Take me home. The car pulled away from the hospital. Behind me were the honking cabs, the chatter of the city, and the lavish wedding of the man who had treated me like trash. Ahead of me was a long highway lined with amber lights, leading me to the place I should have returned to a long time ago. From this moment on, I was no longer Maya Hayes, the despised ex-wife of the Sterling family. I was the sole heir to Providence Holdings, and the living nightmare Hunter Sterling was about to willingly open his door to. The SUV left New York City, enveloped in the thick night. I sat in the back, the smell of hospital antiseptic still lingering on my skin. My hand rested on my lower stomach, where a tiny life had once existed, gone before it could ever call me Mom. Outside the window, the streetlights blurred past like the 5 years of my youth being violently ripped away from my life. Charles sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at me through the rearview mirror. He looked like he wanted to say something, but stopped himself. Perhaps he understood that any words of comfort right now would just be a tiny band-aid on a gaping wound. My phone lit up constantly. Hunter called. Brooke texted. My ex-mother-in-law called. I watched their names flash and fade. My heart was bizarrely calm. In the past, if Hunter texted even a single word saying he was coming home, I would abandon a half-eaten meal just to run to the door. Now, he could call a dozen times, and I wouldn't feel the slightest urge to answer. Near midnight, the car began winding through the private, forested roads of the Hudson Valley. White mist clung to the trees, and the chill seeping through the rockless windows made me shiver. Charles turned around slightly. Miss Hayes, would you like to stop and rest for a bit? I shook my head. No, I want to be home before sunrise. The word home barely left my lips before my eyes burned. For 5 years in the Lipicos 21. Sterling family, I never dared call their place home. Their massive Manhattan penthouse had marble floors, a koi pond on the terrace, and rare orchids. But my place was a cramped room off the kitchen, originally meant for storage. My mother-in-law said it was convenient for me to do the cooking, cleaning, and grocery shopping from there. When Hunter heard this, he just coldly remarked, "If my mother arranged it, just stay there for now. Don't cause drama in the house. For now." That phrase dragged on for 5 years. I used to lie to myself, thinking that if I just endured it long enough, they would see my good heart. But it turns out, some people never learn gratitude for someone else's sacrifices. They only view your tolerance as your obligation. When the car stopped in front of the iron gates of the historic stone estate, nestled in the pine woods, dawn was just breaking. A thin layer of mist wrapped around the slate roof. The black wrought iron gates slowly swung open, and the driveway lights flickered on, illuminating a cobblestone path leading to a grand manor surrounded by sprawling hydrangea bushes. I looked at the scene, my throat tightening. This was the Hayes estate, the private property my grandfather left to my mother, and eventually to me. When I was little, I used to come up here with my mom. She would sit by the bay window, brushing my hair, and say, "Maya, in the future, if you ever get too tired, come back here. In our family, you never have to bow your head to anyone." Yet I had forgotten her words. I had bowed my head to the Sterlings for far too long. Martha, the longtime housekeeper, was waiting on the front steps. As soon as she saw me step out of the car, she hurried over, her hands trembling, her eyes red. "Miss Maya, you've finally come home." I looked at her silver hair, her neat pressed cardigan, and suddenly felt my walls shatter. The outside world saw me as an abandoned castaway, but it turned out there was still a place waiting for my return. "Martha, I came back too late, didn't I?" She shook her head, her voice choking. "Never too late. As long as you made it back, that's all that matters. I stepped into the grand foyer. On the wall hung a portrait of my mother in an elegant silk gown, standing by the rose garden. Beneath it was a portrait of my grandfather, his face stern, but his eyes incredibly kind. I stood before their pictures for a long time, before slowly sinking to my knees. The incision in my abdomen flared with sharp pain, causing cold sweat to bead on my forehead. But I bowed my head deeply. Mom, Grandpa, I'm sorry. I lived like a coward for too long. No one answered me. Only the wind rustled through the pines outside, whispering, like a long sigh. Later, Charles placed a thick binder on the mahogany desk in the study. Miss Hayes, this is the complete domestic asset portfolio now under your name. Aside. From this estate, you hold controlling shares in Providence Holdings, 3 luxury resorts in Miami, 2 boutique hotels in Aspen, a venture capital fund, and liquid assets converted to over $4.5 billion. Furthermore, the aggressive buyout of Sterling Enterprises shares began tonight. I flipped through the pages. Every number that appeared didn't make me happy. It only made me wake up. The thing I was once most terrified of losing wasn't Hunter, it was myself. I used to have everything, yet I willingly lived like someone who had nothing. Right then, Charles's phone rang. He answered it, and his expression immediately shifted. Miss Hayes, my investigators just reported back. Brooke Newman visited a private OB/GYN clinic in Staten Island about 3 months before the wedding. But there's an anomaly in the records. The man accompanying her was not Hunter. Sterling. I looked up. For a moment, the coldness in my heart overpowered the physical. Pain in my stomach. Who was it? We are verifying his identity now, but if our suspicions are correct, that baby isn't Hunter's. I let out a soft laugh. It wasn't a joyful laugh, but the laugh of someone spotting the first massive crack in their enemy's arrogant fortress. Don't release it yet. Hold on to it. Charles looked at me. You're waiting for the right moment. I closed the binder, looking out toward the sunrise over the Biner tree line. Exactly. Hunter loves his reputation. His mother loves their elite status. Brooke loves playing the pure, innocent bride. So I'm going to let them stand at the very top, let them laugh the loudest, and only then will I show them the abyss waiting beneath their feet. Outside, the mist was clearing. A ray of morning light hit the divorce papers IRA had set on the desk, illuminating Hunter's signature until it glared. I reached out and traced it. My heart didn't tremble anymore. The next morning, just as I finished changing into a cream-colored silk slip dress, Martha knocked on my door. Her voice was hushed, as if afraid to break. The rare tranquility of the house. Miss Maya, Eleanor Sterling, is calling from New York on the landline downstairs. She said if you don't pick up, she'll send someone up here. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was still pale, my lips lacking color, but my eyes were different. They were no longer the eyes of the woman waiting for her husband in a cramped room by the kitchen. I draped a cashmere shawl over my shoulders and walked down the grand staircase. The antique phone in the living room was ringing, the sound harsh and intrusive in the vast space. I picked up the receiver, and before I could say a word, Eleanor's shrill voice screeched through. Maya Hayes, what kind of games are you playing with my family? I sat down on the velvet sofa, looking out at the dew-covered pines. Mrs. Sterling, your son and I are divorced. From now on, call me Miss Hayes. Do not use that tone with me. You think I don't know? Last night, after the wedding, there was a hostile buyout of Sterling stock. The board of directors has been calling Hunter all morning. Are you behind this? I laughed lightly. You overestimate me. Didn't you always say I was just a freeloader who only knew how to cook and mop floors? The line went silent for a beat. Then, her tone shifted softer, but still, dripping with elitist condescension. Maya, you were still my daughter-in-law. For 5 years. Hunter is young and impulsive. If he broke your heart, I'll apologize on his behalf. But corporate business is serious. You can't use it to throw a tantrum. I trailed my fingers over the carved wooden armrest. 5 years ago, if she had just said I apologize, I probably would have cried until I couldn't breathe. But now, I just found it comical. Delayed kindness always reeks of ulterior motive. Are you apologizing because I lost my child? Or because someone is buying your family stock? Eleanor choked. A moment later, she snapped. That pregnancy wasn't even confirmed to be Hunter's. Don't use that to blackmail my family. My chest seized. My hand involuntarily gripped the armrest until my knuckles turned white. I knew she was vicious, but I never imagined that, faced with the blonde death of an unborn child, she could be so sociopathic. Don't worry, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I won't force your family to claim that child ever again. Then what do you want? I want you all to taste what it feels like to be treated like trash, abandoned, and pushed to a dead end with no one reaching out to help. I hung up, leaving her screaming my name into the dial tone. Martha stood. Nearby, her eyes red. She walked over and placed a cup of hot chamomile tea in front of me. Miss Maya, people like that aren't worth your heartache. I held the teacup, letting the warmth seep into my palms. I'm not heartbroken. Over her, I'm just grieving for my baby. Martha bowed her head in silence. That quiet presence brought me more comfort than any words could. By noon, Charles arrived at the estate with 2 assistants. He placed a blue folder in front of me. Miss Hayes, we've secured nearly 7% of Sterling Enterprises' floating shares. If we keep driving the price up, they'll be forced to liquidate cash or leverage more collateral. What's their financial situation? Not as pretty as they pretend. They expanded too fast over the last 3 years and are heavily leveraged with the banks. A major waterfront development in Chicago is tied up in legal red tape. If the stock fluctuates violently, the banks will trigger a margin call. I flipped through the files, looking at the cold numbers arranged in neat rows. The Sterling family used to use their money to crush my self-esteem. Now, I would use the very thing they worshipped to teach them the meaning of fear. Keep pushing, but keep the buyer's identity hidden. Charles nodded. And, regarding Brooke Newman, we have updates. The man who took her to the clinic is Preston Cole, the CEO of a mid-tier PR agency. They knew each other long before she became Hunter's secretary. I looked up. For a moment, the coldness in my heart completely numbed the physical pain. Do we have proof? Photos of them at the clinic, bank transfer, records, and an audio recording. But we need a little more time to verify the legal admissibility. I closed the folder. Don't release it yet. If you want a knife to cut deep, you have to wait for the target to step closer. Right then, my phone buzzed. A text from Hunter. Maya, let's meet. I think. There's a massive misunderstanding. I looked at the text and smirked. In the past, I would have burned with desperation for his explanations. Now that the explanation had arrived, it was as worthless as scrap paper. I replied with a single sentence. If you want to, see me, come to the Hudson Valley, but make sure you bring your new wife. Less than 10 seconds later, Hunter called. I didn't pick up. I let it ring out. In the sunlit living room, slowly stood up and walked out onto the veranda. The crisp New York breeze blew through my hair, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. In the distance, the valley lay peaceful, beautiful enough to make you mistakenly believe life was still gentle. But I knew the real storm was just beginning. That afternoon, I sat in the estate's library. In front of me was a massive monitor displaying the Sterling Enterprises stock ticker. The green and red numbers flashed relentlessly, cold but beautiful, like a chessboard where I was finally the one moving the pieces. Charles stood next to me holding a tablet. His voice was steady. Sterling is reacting. They're pouring cash in to buy back stock and stabilize the price, but their liquidity is weaker than we projected. I watched the graph inch upward, feeling no joy. It was strange, I used to think, that if the day came where I could make Hunter suffer, I would feel triumphant. But now that it was happening, all that was left inside me was an icy emptiness. Perhaps because what I wanted to take back wasn't just money or pride. I wanted the people who abandoned me in that operating room to understand that some debts cannot be paid with an apology. The landline rang in the hallway. Martha walked in, looking uneasy. Miss Maya, Hunter Sterling is at the gate. Brooke Newman is with him. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them. Let them in. Don't serve the good tea. Use the cheap mugs. Martha looked slightly surprised, then nodded. Understood. I didn't go down immediately. I intentionally made them wait for 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes were nothing compared to the 5 years I spent sitting in that cramped room waiting for Hunter, hearing his car pull up, only to listen to his footsteps go straight upstairs without calling my name. When I finally descended the staircase, Hunter was standing in the middle of the living room. He looked far more haggard than he did at his wedding. Brooke sat on the sofa, wearing a beige maternity dress, her hands resting on her stomach. Her face wore its usual sweet, pitiful expression. When Hunter saw me, he froze. His eyes swept over my silk dress, the pearl necklace at my throat, the vast living room adorned with antique oil paintings. I saw shock in his eyes, confusion, and even a flicker of belated regret. Maya, I cut him off. There is no Mrs. Sterling here to take your orders, and no wife waiting for your excuses. If you have something to say, make it quick. Brooke stood up first, her eyes rimmed red. Maya, I know you're angry, but you can't force love. Hunter and I genuinely love each other. If it's compensation you want, I can talk to him. I laughed out loud. Miss Newman, are you trying to use my ex-husband's money to compensate me? Her face paled, but she quickly lowered her head, her voice trembling. I didn't. I mean it like that. I just don't want things to be so tense. After all, I'm pregnant. Please don't do anything that might affect my baby. Those two words, my baby, sliced across my chest like a razor. I looked down at the hands resting on her stomach. An unborn life was innocent, but adults sure loved using those lives as shields for their own greed. I looked her dead in the eye. Are you sure that baby is Hunter's? The air in the room instantly froze. Hunter frowned. Maya, don't cross the line. Brooke is pregnant. Don't agitate her. I turned to him, calmly asking, do you trust her that much? Of course. She's not like you. She's not calculating. And she didn't hide her identity to trap someone. Hearing that, my heart, which I thought was completely dead, still gave a faint twinge. Even now, he thought the fault was mine. I hid my identity to trap him, yet his affairs, marrying someone else while I was hospitalized, sending an invitation to my hospital bed that was true love? Hunter, do you know why I never told you who I really was? His face hardened. Because you wanted to play poor to test me. No. Because you once said you hated women who were stronger than you. I was stupid enough to think that if I just made myself a little smaller, you would love me a little more. His face stiffened at that, but a second later he looked away, as if refusing to acknowledge that he was the one who had forced me to erase myself from my own life. Brooke suddenly grabbed his arm, tears rolling down her cheeks. Hunter, let's go. I don't feel well. I looked at her pathetic act and felt utterly bored. I reached over, took the wine, folder Charles had prepared on the coffee table, pulled out a photograph, and slid it toward her. In the picture, Brooke was walking out of a private OB/GYN clinic, standing intimately next to a man in a gray button-down shirt. Brooke's face instantly went paper white. I smiled. Miss Newman, don't rush off. The show is just getting started. Hunter snatched the photo, stared at it for a few seconds, and whipped his head toward Brooke. Who is this? Brooke trembled. It's just a former client. Don't listen to her crazy lies. I stood up, slowly walking toward the window. Outside, the Hudson Valley fog was rolling back over the pines. My voice was very soft, but loud enough for both of them to hear perfectly. Hunter, you didn't believe me when I told you I lost our baby. Are you going to believe your new bride this time? Hunter gripped the photo, his knuckles white. His eyes darted between the man in the picture and Brooke. She stood there paralyzed, her lips trembling, unable to form a coherent sentence. Watching this, I found it hilarious. Just days ago, she had confidently mailed me a wedding invitation, using soft words to salt the wounds of a woman who had just miscarried. Yet here she was, standing in my house, shaking like a fraud, whose veil had just been ripped off. Hunter, don't misunderstand. He really is just an old client. I wasn't feeling well that day, and he was just giving me a ride to the clinic. Giving you a ride to an OB/GYN appointment? Hunter's voice wasn't loud, but I could hear something fracturing inside him. His pride was much more fragile than I thought. He could betray me, marry someone else while I was in a hospital bed, but he couldn't stomach the possibility of being played by his new woman. Brooke burst into tears, her timing impeccable. You don't trust me? I'm carrying your child. How could you let one blurry photo make you doubt me? I clapped my hands once, softly. Fascinating. A woman who inserted herself into someone else's marriage is now using the word trust to demand protection. Hunter whipped around to glare at me. Maya, shut up. This is between me and my wife. I nodded. Right. Between you and your wife. So go home, close the door, and deal with it. The Hayes estate isn't a stage for Miss Newman's victim act. Brooke gripped Hunter's arm tighter. Hunter, let's go. My stomach hurts. That sentence sent Hunter into an immediate panic. He supported her, his eyes. I'm still chaotic, but his instinct to protect a pregnant woman made him forget the photo in his hand. I watched them go, my heart turning to ice. 5 years ago, my stomach hurt too. I called him too, but all I got was the long ringing tone. Before it went to voicemail. It turned out he wasn't incapable of worrying. I just wasn't the person he worried about. As Hunter guided Brooke to the door, I called out, Hunter Sterling. He stopped, but didn't turn around. You can keep that photo. Tear it up. Throw it away, or get a paternity test. But remember, the man who walked her into that clinic wasn't you. His shoulders stiffened. Brooke turned her head to look at me, her eyes flashing. With unconcealed hatred, I smiled back at her. That smile surely let her know this was only the beginning. After they left, the living room fell silent. Martha came in to clear the untouched mugs from the table, asking quietly, Miss Maya, why didn't you just show him all the evidence at once? I looked at the gold-embossed wedding invitation still sitting in the drawer. The gold that had stung my eyes in the hospital room now looked like a VIP ticket to their destruction, because a wounded animal just runs wild. I need them to tear each other apart first. Martha stayed quiet for a moment, then asked, Can you handle this? I looked. Out the window, Hunter's car was pulling out of the gates. Through the tinted glass, I could see Brooke leaning into his shoulder, while he looked down at a phone probably zooming in on that photograph again and again. I can handle it. I survived 5 years of humiliation. What is a little bit of pain now? Later that evening, Charles sent me an audio file. Brooke's voice came through, crystal clear. Don't worry. As long as I marry Hunter, you'll never have to worry about money again. Then a man's low chuckle. And the kid? As long as it has the Sterling last name, who cares? Hearing that, the hand I used to hold my water glass froze. Even having anticipated it, my spine still chilled. Not out of pity for Hunter, but out of absolute disgust for people who would use a child as a bargaining chip for wealth. I moved the audio file into an encrypted folder and texted Charles to hold on to it until the Sterling Enterprises shareholder meeting. He replied instantly, You want to unveil it in front of the entire board? I looked up at my mother's portrait and typed out my reply. I want Hunter Sterling to lose his company, his bride, and his dignity, all on the exact same day. I didn't sleep that night. The dull ache in my lower abdomen pulsed with every breath, reminding me that my body hadn't healed, even if my mind had forced it to stand up and fight. I sat in the study until dawn, facing 3 large monitors. One showed Sterling's plummeting stock, another showed the internal financial reports Charles had managed to acquire, and the third displayed the surveillance photos of Brooke and Preston Cole, going to dinners, walking into hotels, clinic visits. There was even a shot of Brooke resting her head on his shoulder outside the clinic, her hand on her stomach, looking genuinely blissful. I stared at that photo for a long time. It turned out the woman who confidently wore a white dress into the Sterling family had once looked just as deeply in love with someone else. At 7 a.m., Charles called. Miss Hayes, the banks just issued a formal notice to Sterling Enterprises demanding additional collateral. The stock volatility triggered a review of their loan covenants. I took a sip of cold tea. How was Hunter reacting? He called an emergency meeting with his CFO. Eleanor Sterling showed up at the corporate headquarters this morning too. Rumor has it the mother and son had a massive screaming match because she suspects you're the one pulling the strings. I smirked, a little late to start suspecting now. One more thing. Sterling Enterprises is calling an emergency shareholder meeting this Friday. They want to pacify the minority shareholders and find a way to block the mystery buyer from taking over. I set my teacup down. Get my credentials ready. I'll be attending. Charles paused. You want to appear in person? Yes, but don't announce my identity to the start. I want to sit in the back row and listen to them paint a pretty picture of themselves first. I'll arrange it. Just as I hung up, my personal cell rang. It was Eleanor Sterling. I stared at the name for a few seconds before answering. This time, her tone wasn't domineering. It was a mix of anger and terror. Maya, where are you? I want to meet and talk properly. Mrs. Sterling, I seem to recall you telling me never to call you mother again. She choked, then lowered her voice. I was just angry. Regardless, you lived in this family for 5 years. We have history. Hunter is young and foolish. He only rushed to marry Brooke because that girl bewitched him. If you still love him, help him this one time. Every word sounded so brutally ironic. When I was her daughter-in-law, if I was sick, she called me weak. If I cried, she called me a bad omen. When I lost my baby, she said it probably didn't have Sterling blood anyway. Yet now, just because her company was shaking, she suddenly remembered our history. How exactly do you want me to help? Her voice brightened immediately. You have money now. You can back out of the corporate buyout or personally lend Hunter a bridge loan. Just get us through this and I'll force him to divorce Brooke. If you want to come back to the Sterling family, I won't object anymore. I laughed, laughing so hard my incision ached. You think I still want to step foot in that house? Maya, life is hard for a divorced woman. Having money is nothing compared to having a proper, respectable family. A respectable family? I repeated, my voice turning to ice. Is that the family that made me sleep in a storage closet for 5 years? The family that mailed a wedding invitation to my hospital bed right after I miscarried? Or the family that now wants to sell out their new bride in exchange for the ex-wife's money? Eleanor gasped. Don't say such ugly things. Ugly? Then make sure you show up to the shareholder meeting this Friday. I have a lot more ugly things I want you and your son to hear. I hung up before she could ask anything else. Outside, the morning sun was spilling over the hydrangeas. The light was ruthlessly beautiful. I stood up, opened my drawer, and took out the small box holding Hunter and Brooke's red and gold wedding invitation. On top of it, I placed a black USB drive containing the audio recordings and all the photographs. That would be my second wedding gift. Later that afternoon, Hunter texted, Maya, my mother said you're coming to the shareholder meeting. Please don't cause a scene. We can talk in private. I replied, on the day you married Brooke, you made sure to do it in front of the whole world. When I give you my gift, it's only right that I have an audience, too. He didn't reply again, but I knew that from that moment on, real terror had finally crept into his heart. As for me, I simply locked the USB drive away, waiting for the final curtain to rise. Friday morning. It was raining lightly in New York. The raindrops slid down the Dislato tinted windows of my Maybach like thin scratches that vanished as soon as the Pridesley Laudes wipers swept by. I wore an ivory-tailored suit, my hair pulled into a sleek low bun. I wore no flashy jewelry, only a vintage hydrangea brooch my mother had left me. Charles sat beside me, holding a black leather briefcase. The USB drive, carrying my second wedding gift, was tucked into his inside pocket. Encrypted, backups had already been sent to 3 secure locations. I wasn't going to let anyone steal this moment from me. When the car pulled up to the Glass and Steel Sterling Enterprises headquarters, in Manhattan, I looked up at the towering skyscraper. During my 5 years of marriage, I had come here dozens of times to bring Hunter lunch. The receptionists used to look at me with pity. The corporate staff whispered behind my back about the CEO's country bumpkin housewife. Once, I stood in the lobby for over an hour just to hand him a thermos of hot soup. Brooke had finally come down to take it, smiling sweetly and saying, Hunter is in a meeting with me. Just leave it here. Today, I walked through the main double doors. I held no soup thermos. My head was not bowed, and I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission. The 2 security guards saw my name on the VIP shareholder list and immediately bowed. I walked past them, the click of my heels echoing sharply against the marble floor every step striking like a hammer against the past. The main boardroom on the 50th floor was already packed. Hunter sat at the head of the table, looking pale but trying desperately to maintain his composure. Next to him was Eleanor, her makeup flawless but her eyes sunken from lack of sleep. Brooke was there too, wearing a beige maternity dress, sitting timidly near her husband, looking as fragile as a wilting flower. I didn't walk to the front. I chose a seat in the very back row, where few people noticed me except for Hunter. The moment our eyes met, his hand gripped the expensive pen on the table so hard his knuckles turned white. The meeting began with the usual corporate rhetoric: market volatility, stock, stabilization strategies, blind faith in leadership. Hunter stood at the podium, his voice raspy but projecting fake confidence. Sterling Enterprises is a family's legacy. Despite some recent, unforeseen market turbulence, I guarantee the company remains fully operational, and there is zero risk of us losing controlling interest. Hearing that, I smirked. Charles leaned over and whispered, "Time? Not yet. Let him dig the hole a little deeper." A major shareholder stood up, aggressively questioning the impending loan defaults. Another demanded to know the identity of the mysterious buyer holding nearly 17% of the shares. Hunter deflected, sweat beading on his forehead. Eleanor kept winking from the sidelines, signaling him to keep his cool. Brooke kept her head down, hand on her stomach, but her eyes kept darting toward the cleanse, back doors, as if she wanted to flee. Finally, when Hunter said, "We believe this new investment group has no hostile intentions towards Sterling Enterprises," I slowly stood up. The entire boardroom turned to look at me. Whispers erupted like wind sweeping through a canyon. "Are you sure about that?" I asked. Hunter froze. Eleanor shot out of her chair. "Maya Hayes, what are you doing? Here?" I walked slowly down the center aisle. Charles followed, placing the black portfolio on the main conference table before calmly opening it. "Members of the board," I announced, my voice echoing in the cavernous room. "I am Maya Hayes, representing the investment group currently holding 17.8% of Sterling Enterprises stock. Including the proxy votes I secured this morning, our voting power now stands at 23%. The room exploded. Hunter stood completely paralyzed at the podium. Eleanor stumbled, grabbing the back of a chair for support. Brooke's head snapped up, her face as pale as a ghost. I looked at Hunter, speaking slowly. "You once told me I was only good for cooking and laundry, that I didn't understand business. I came here today to learn exactly how a business geniuses like you plans to save your company." Hunter gritted his teeth. "Maya, if you want revenge, come at me. Leave the bolt company out of it." I stared straight into his eyes. "When I was lying on an operating table losing our child, did you ever think to leave me out of it?" That sentence silenced the entire room. Hunter's face turned ashen. "I didn't stop," I signaled Charles. He plugged the USB into the laptop, connected to the massive projector screen. Before the audio played, I turned to Brooke, who was now trembling, her manicured nails digging into Hunter's sleeve. "Miss Newman, I suggest you take a seat. For this next gift, you're the star." Charles clicked the mouse. The giant screen behind Hunter instantly lit up. First came the photo of Brooke stepping out of the Staten Island clinic, standing arm in arm with Preston Cole. Immediately following was the audio, recording booming through the boardroom speakers. "Don't worry, as long as I marry Hunter, you'll never have to worry about money." Again, the man's low chuckle. "And the kid?" Brooke's voice, softer but crystal. Clear, impossible to deny. "As long as it has the Sterling last name, who? Cadiz?" The boardroom went dead silent. No whispering, no shuffling of papers, just the hum of the HVAC system overhead. Hunter stood rooted to the floor as if nailed there, his face draining of all blood, turning a sickly gray. Brooke sprang up, lunging toward the screen as if she could physically cover it up. "It's fake! It's all fake! She doctored my voice. She's trying to ruin me." I stood perfectly still, watching her thrash. Just 5 days ago she had confidently sent me a wedding invitation, using pretty words to stomp on the places. Grief of a mother who had just lost her baby. She probably never imagined her own voice would echo in front of dozens of Sterling shareholders. Hunter violently grabbed Brooke's wrist. "Explain this right now. What is that? Recording?" Brooke sobbed hysterically. tears ruining her perfect makeup. Hunter, I don't know. She hates me, that's why she did this. I'm carrying your... Baby, you have to believe me. I tilted my head slightly. Hunter, doesn't that sound familiar? The day I told you I lost my baby, you said I was putting on an act. Today, it's your turn to choose whether to believe or not. That sentence slapped him across the face. Hunter looked at me, his lips trembling, unable to form a word. Eleanor suddenly lunged forward and slapped Brooke hard across the cheek. The crack echoed loudly in the room. You filthy tramp! You dared trick the Sterling family! Brooke clutched her cheek, screaming back, Who are you to yell at me? If your family wasn't so obsessed with having an heir and protecting your social status, would I even have gotten through your front door? Eleanor staggered backward. The room devolved into absolute chaos. Hunter looked like a soulless corpse, standing between his mother and his new wife. On one side, his company was collapsing. On the other, his unborn child was a fraud. And standing right in front of him was me, holding enough shares to ensure he never slept peacefully again. I didn't let them drag out their performance. I grabbed the microphone on the table, my voice cutting through the noise with icy precision. Board members, I didn't come here to watch a domestic dispute. I am here as a major stakeholder with voting rights. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence to remove Hunter Sterling from his position as CEO, citing personal scandals, severe financial risk mismanagement, and gross operational incompetence. Hunter whipped his head toward me, his eyes bloodshot. Maya, are you really going to force me to a dead end? I met his gaze, my tone light but lethal. You're wrong. I didn't force you down this dead end. You've been walking down it yourself for the last 5 years. The moment I finished speaking, the room erupted into shouting. Some stood up to object. Others demanded an independent audit, and several shareholders began screaming at Hunter for dragging the entire corporation through the mud over his personal affairs. Hunter stood at the podium, gripping the microphone so hard it let out a piercing screech of feedback. Eleanor frantically grabbed her son's arm, yelling, No! No one is voting! Hunter is the CEO appointed by his grandfather. You have no right. A senior board member coldly replied, Mrs. Sterling, this is a publicly traded corporation, not your family dining table. If the CEO destroys the company's reputation, the shareholders have every right to remove him. Eleanor's face turned purple. Sensing the disaster, Brooke began backing slowly toward the exit. But Charles had already signaled the security guards to block to the doors. I looked at her in her beige maternity dress, tear-stained face, hands trembling over her stomach. If you didn't know the truth, you'd think she was the most tragic victim in the room. But I had learned the hard way. Tears aren't always innocent. Just then, the heavy boardroom doors pushed open. A man in his late 50s strode in. He was tall, graying at the temples, wearing a sharp charcoal suit. The room instantly fell silent. Even Eleanor blanched. Uncle Arthur, Hunter rasped. It was Arthur Sterling, Hunter's uncle, and the second largest shareholder of Sterling Enterprises. For years, he had lived in Chicago managing his own private equity firm, rarely interfering in company politics. But everyone knew that a single word from Arthur held more weight than a dozen minority shareholders combined. Arthur didn't look at Hunter. His eyes landed squarely on Brooke, with just one look, her face drained of whatever color was left. My nephew's new bride looks awfully familiar, Arthur said slowly. Brooke took half a step back. I've never met you, Arthur scoffed. If you haven't met me, surely you remember the clinic in Staten Island. The day you went with Preston Cole. You told the doctor that the baby's father was away on a business trip. The man you called the father that day was certainly not Hunter. It felt as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Hunter snapped his head toward Brooke. His eyes no longer held anger, only a desperate, hollow panic. Is he telling the truth? Brooke shook her head frantically. No, it's not true. I don't know who this man is. Hunter, you have to believe me. Arthur tossed a thick manila envelope onto the table. I don't have the free time to frame a little girl. Inside are copies of the appointment logs, security, footage from the clinic lobby, and sworn affidavits from the reception staff. I was going to keep this quiet because it's a humiliating stain on the Sterling Lowe's name, But since Miss Hayes opened the floor today, I think it's time we took out the trash. Eleanor collapsed heavily into her leather chair, her mouth opening and closing. Impossible. My grandson. I looked at her without an ounce of pity. When she used to scream at me for failing to produce a sterling heir, did she ever think karma would answer her? Prayers like this? Hunter picked up the envelope. His hands shook so violently he could barely tear it open. When the glossy photos spilled out, he only needed to look at one before his knees gave out. He slumped into his chair, his eyes glued to the great loss. Picture of Brooke clutching Preston Cole's arm outside the clinic. Truth rarely requires a long explanation. One photo is enough to turn a million vows into a pathetic joke. Brooke suddenly lunged forward, dropping to her knees in front of Hunter. Listen to me. At first, I didn't know I actually loved you. I just wanted financial security. But later, I truly fell in love with you. Regardless of who. The father is. The baby can take the sterling name. You already married me. You can't abandon me now. Hunter stared at her, his lips trembling. So, you admit it. Brooke froze. That single second of silence was enough to slaughter whatever remained of their relationship. Hunter violently stood up, shoving her away. Brooke crumpled to the carpet, sobbing hysterically. Eleanor rushed forward to scream curses at her, while the shareholders began loudly demanding an immediate vote. Arthur stepped up to the main podium, his voice commanding and absolute. Effective immediately, I moved to suspend Hunter Sterling's executive powers, pending a full forensic audit and a PR crisis intervention. All in favor, raise your hands. One by one, hands went up around the massive table. 1, 2. Then, nearly the entire room. I sat perfectly still, watching Hunter stand amidst the wreckage he had built with his own 2 hands. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot. But there was no arrogance left in them, just the look of a man who, for the first time in his life, understood what it meant to have the entire world turn its back on him. When the meeting adjourned, I stood up and walked out. I was halfway down the corridor when Hunter chased after me, his voice cracking. Maya, wait. I stopped but didn't turn around. What else is there? He stood behind me for a long time before choking out, I was wrong. I closed my eyes briefly. Those 3 words. If he had said them just a little sooner, they might have been what I wanted to hear most in the world. But now, they just sounded like a hollow echo in an abandoned house. I turned around to face him, my voice calm. You weren't wrong to marry her. You were wrong for thinking I would stand in the exact same spot, waiting forever for you to turn around. Hunter stood paralyzed. The 50th floor hallway was sleek, bright, and silent, yet so cold I could hear his rapid breathing. Behind us, the boardroom was still chaotic. Shareholders crowded around Arthur, corporate lawyers were scrambling, and Eleanor's shrieks at Brooke echoed through the walls like breaking glass. But amid all that chaos, Hunter only stared at me, his eyes clouded like a man waking up from a decade-long fever dream. Maya, I truly didn't know about the baby. I looked at him, finding the statement tragically laughable. You didn't know because you didn't want to. No. He took a step forward. If I had answered the phone that day, if I had come to the hospital. There are no ifs, I interrupted. The baby is gone. You married someone else. Reality doesn't resurrect itself just because you add the word if. His face was ghostly pale. The lips that had coldly delivered so many cruel insults over the years were now trembling too hard to speak. I remembered the claimant of feigned in a purse, the days I cooked for his mother while running a high fever, and he just glanced to me, telling me to stop playing the martyr. I remembered standing outside his office building in the pouring rain, watching him hold an umbrella for Brooke as they got into his car, while I stood across the street, lips blue from the cold. I remembered it all, not to torture myself, but to remind myself never to go soft again. Hunter lowered his head, his voice a ragged whisper. Brooke played me. I thought she was genuine. I thought you would always be there. That, no matter what I did, you would never leave. I gave a faint, sad smile. You're right, I used to think the same thing. I thought if I just stayed long enough, you would eventually look at me. But you. Know what? A person who waits forever eventually realizes that it's not patience, it's self-degradation. He suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. His hand was freezing and shaking. I looked at his hand, feeling no anger, just a deep revulsion toward an old habit. In the past, I craved his touch so desperately that a brush of his fingers would keep me happy all night. Now, his touch felt like a dirty rope, trying to drag me back into that dark storage closet. Let go, Maya. Give me one chance. I'll divorce Brooke. I'll make my mother apologize. I'll pay you back for everything I owe you. I yanked my hand away. Pay me back with what? With the CEO title you were just stripped of? With your second marriage that just became a tabloid joke? Or with the Sterling penthouse where I slept next to the mops? He recoiled as if I had struck him. I lowered my voice. Hunter, you don't want me back because you love me. You just can't stomach the fact that the woman you threw away is the only one who has the power to save you. That struck the core of what he was trying to hide. Panic flashed in his eyes, but he couldn't deny it. Right then, the boardroom doors flew open. Brooke ran out, her hair a mess, a bright red handprint blazing across her cheek. When she saw Hunter standing in front of me, she burst into a tearful, manic laugh. Wow. Bravo, Hunter. The second you realize I'm useless, you go crawling right back to your ex-wife? Hunter spun around, his voice dripping with venom. Shut your mouth. You have no right to speak. Brooke clutched her stomach, shaking, as she laughed. I have every right. You think you're such a good man? Did you? Marry me because you loved me? No. You married me because I acted obedient, because I worshipped you, because I said the pretty words this woman stopped saying. You don't love anyone, you just love the feeling of someone kneeling at your feet. Hunter raised his hand to slap her, but his arm froze midair. Even now, with his world burning, he was too obsessed with his image to hit a pregnant woman in a public hallway. Brooke glared at me, her eyes burning with pure malice. Maya, you won, but don't act so high and mighty. If you had told him you were rich, that you were the heir to Providence Holdings, do you think he ever would have left you? I looked at her and answered calmly. A man who calculates my worth based on my bank account never deserved me in the first place. Brooke choked on her words. Hunter stood frozen in place. Charles stepped up, beside me, whispering, Miss Hayes, the car is waiting downstairs. The press is already swarming the lobby. We should leave. I nodded. Before walking away, I glanced at Arthur Sterling. He gave me a complex look, then offered a slight nod, an acknowledgement of defeat and respect. I knew that after today, Sterling Enterprises would no longer be Hunter's private playground. The chessboard had a new master, and Hunter's first piece had been permanently knocked off the board. As I stepped into the elevator, Hunter yelled out, Maya, I'll come find you. I'll prove to you how sorry I am. The steel elevator doors slid shut, cutting him off. I looked at my reflection in the cold metal. I was still pale, but my eyes were steady. I whispered to myself, your regret is your business. Forgiving you is a right I choose not to exercise. By the time my SUV pulled away from the Sterling building, the sidewalk was swarming with paparazzi. Camera flashes bounced off the tinted windows like razor blades, but no one could see my face. Charles sat beside me, his phone blowing up with texts from his team. Within an hour of the board meeting, the scandal surrounding the Sterling CEO's new bride had gone viral across financial blogs and social media. People weren't just gossiping about Brooke's fake pregnancy, they were buzzing about the mystery shareholder block that had ousted Hunter. My name hadn't leaked yet, but I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever, and I didn't need to anymore. Charles put his phone down. Miss Hayes, Arthur Sterling just texted. He wants to meet privately tonight. He said if you genuinely want to restructure the company, he's willing to listen to your proposal. I looked at the gridlocked Manhattan traffic outside. The city was still loud, still bright, as if a life hadn't just been torn apart in that boardroom. Tell him tomorrow. Today, I'm going back to the Hudson Valley. Hunter isn't going to die just because he lost his chair. I, on the other hand, almost died once. I need to rest. Charles nodded silently. The car sped out of the city limits. As we passed the Plaza Hotel, where Hunter had hosted his wedding, I instinctively turned my head. The floral arches had probably been torn down, the red carpets rolled up, the champagne flutes washed clean. The wedding of the century had turned into a citywide laughingstock in less than a week. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a strange emptiness. Because I understood that when the truth is exposed, the person hurting the most usually isn't the one who was lied to, but the one they had both stepped on together. As we hit the winding upstate roads, it began to rain. I leaned my head against the window, exhausted, and drifted into a fitful sleep. I dreamt I was lying on the operating table, the blinding white surgical lights glaring in my eyes. I was screaming Hunter's name, but no one answered. Then, I heard the faint cry of a baby, drifting further and further away, until all that was left was the sound of rain hitting the car window. I jerked awake, my hand instinctively grabbing my lower stomach. Charles turned around. "Miss Hayes, are you all right?" I exhaled slowly. "I'm fine, just a dream." But I knew it wasn't just a dream. Some losses don't fade with time, they just relocate. By day, they hide beneath composure. By night, they crawl out of your memory to remind you exactly how much you bled. By early evening, the car pulled up to the Hayes estate. Martha was waiting on Hayes, the porch with an umbrella and a coat. Seeing me, she rushed out to help me. "Miss Maya, you look terrible. I made you some hot chicken soup." I nodded, but before I could step inside, another car violently pulled up to the Procida front gates. Hunter got out into the pouring rain. His expensive suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, and his face looked so haggard he seemed to have aged a decade in a single day. The estate security guards immediately blocked him, but he stared straight through the iron bars at me, his voice hoarse. "Maya, I just need 5 minutes." Martha frowned deeply. "Miss Maya, let me have them throw him out." I grabbed her arm. For 5 years, I had stood in the rain waiting for Hunter, more times than I could count. Today, it was finally his turn to stand outside the gates and wait for me. I walked out to the edge of the porch, staying completely dry under the awning. "Speak." Hunter looked at me through the torrential rain, his eyes bloodshot. "I had my guys run a background check," Brooke confessed. "The baby isn't mine," I replied. Coolly. "Congratulations on finding out the truth. Maya, I'm sorry. Not just for today. I'm sorry for treating you like an outsider in our own marriage for 5 years. I'm sorry I didn't pick up the phone when you needed me most. I'm sorry about the baby." The moment he said the word baby, my throat clamped shut. But I refused to let a single tear fall in front of him ever again. "Hunter, your apologies are like offering someone an umbrella after they've already died of hypothermia. It might make you feel less guilty, but it doesn't save anyone." He took a step forward, shoving against the security guard's arm. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make it up to you." I looked at the man who used to be my entire world and slowly shook my head. Some things, once lost, can never be compensated for, and some people, once they leave, never need to be welcomed back. The rain fell harder. Hunter stood outside the gates, his shoulders trembling. I didn't know if he was shaking from the cold or from regret. I turned my back and walked toward the front door. Behind me, his voice broke into a sob. "Maya, I still love you." I paused for a second, speaking without turning around. "No, you don't. You just love the woman you just realized you no longer own." The heavy oak doors of the estate shut with a thud, locking the sound of the rain and him screaming my name outside. I stood in the warm, softly lit foyer, looking up at my mother's portrait. For the first time in a very long time, I realized I didn't need an answer from Hunter anymore. What I needed was to take back the rest of my life. I woke up the next morning while fog still blanketed the pine trees outside my blank window. Last night's storm had left dark, damp streaks on the stone driveway, like the footprints of someone who had walked by, but hadn't fully vanished. Martha told me Hunter had stood in the rain until almost midnight. He only left when the security guards threatened to call an ambulance because he was visibly swaying on his feet. Hearing that, I just nodded. In the past, if he even coughed slightly, I would panic, rushing to make him soup, fetching his meds, calling the concierge doctor. Now, knowing he stood in a downpour for hours, my heart was as still as a frozen lake. I wasn't cruel. He had simply bankrupt every ounce of empathy I had left for him. At 10 a.m., Charles brought Arthur Sterling to the estate. Unlike his imposing demeanor in the boardroom, Arthur wore a simple gray cashmere sweater today, carrying a tin of artisanal tea. He set it on the table and looked me directly in the eye. Miss Hayes, I didn't come here to apologize on behalf of the Sterling family. I know an outsider's apology means nothing compared to what you've endured. I invited him to sit and poured the tea myself. So you're here for Sterling Enterprises. Arthur nodded. Yes. The company was my late brother's life work. Hunter ruined it, but there are thousands of innocent employees relying on us. If your goal is to burn it to the ground for revenge, I can't blame you. But if you want to take the reins, I need to know your plan. I watched the thin wisp of steam rise from the teacup. His question reminded me, kind of myself from 5 years ago. A woman with the intellect to conquer the corporate world, who chose instead to shrink herself into her husband's kitchen. I have no interest in bankrupting a company just to watch Hunter cry. The ones who need to pay are him and the parasites who abuse their power, not the employees. Arthur listened quietly. I slid a comprehensive restructuring plan across the table. I had drafted it the night before. I want a full independent audit of the stalled Chicago project. I want the shell company vendors cut off. I want Hunter's loyalist CFO replaced. And I want to liquidate non-performing assets to pay down the bank margins. If you agree to cooperate, I need your proxy vote for the next 3 months. In exchange, you can sit as the interim chairman while I direct the restructuring fund and take control of the finances. Arthur stared at me for a long time. There was no elitist disdain in his eyes, like Eleanor had, nor was there pity. He looked at me like a true opponent at the negotiating table. You're much more prepared than I anticipated. I smirked. Just because I stayed quiet for 5 years doesn't mean I was blind. Arthur sighed. Hunter really was blind. No. He only saw what he wanted to see. A man used to women bowing to him gets very uncomfortable when he realizes the woman is actually standing taller than he is. Arthur closed the folder. I agree to your terms. But brace yourself, Eleanor. Won't go down without a fight. Hunter will refuse to let go of his power, and Brooke. She's backed into a corner. Desperate people do reckless things. Before I could respond, Charles's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression turning dark. Miss Hayes, we have a problem. Brooke Newman is live streaming. She's claiming you used your wealth to force her into a fake miscarriage, fabricated the clinic evidence, and drove her to the brink just to steal her husband's company. The clip is going viral. Martha gasped. Lord in heaven, how toxic can one woman be? I took the phone from Charles. On the screen, Brooke was sitting in a cheap motel room, her hair a mess, wearing no makeup. She was crying hysterically, clutching her stomach. The comments below were flooding in by the thousands. Some felt bad for her, others ranted about the evil billionaires, and many cursed me for being a vicious, jealous ex-wife out to destroy a pregnant woman. I watched the screen and actually chuckled. She was smarter than I thought. Before the legal evidence was fully released to the public, she struck at the crowd's empathy. A crying pregnant woman on camera makes people conveniently forget everything she did to get there. Charles looked at me. Should we release the full dossier immediately? I shook my head. Not yet. If she wants to play the court of public opinion, I'll give to her a show. But it has to be a show she can never recover from. Arthur looked at me. What are you going to do? I put the phone down. My voice so detached it scared me. Invite Preston Cole over. If Brooke wants to play the victim for the whole world, I'm putting her real leading man on the main stage. That evening, the Hayes estate was blazing with lights. Not for a gala, but for a war. This battle wasn't happening in a boardroom. It was happening online, where mobs were ready to stone a woman just because the camera angles on some fake tears were right. Brooke was still streaming, her voice hoarse from crying. She kept talking about a mother's love, painting me as a bitter, abandoned woman using blood money to bribe doctors and ruin the Sterling family. I read the comments scrolling by. In the past, a harsh word from my mother-in-law would ruin my entire week. Now, thousands of strangers cursing my name washed over me like rain on a slate roof. Charles set his phone down. Miss Hayes, Preston Cole agreed to come, but he wants money. I didn't look up. How much? $2 million. He says if he doesn't get it, he'll keep his mouth shut. Or he might just back Brooke's story. Martha fumed. What kind of scum is this? Extorting people over his own unborn child? I stared at the screen where Brooke was clutching her stomach. Her and Preston, Cole, one wanted to use a baby to buy her way into high society, the other wanted to use the baby for a quick payday. In this entire play, the only innocent party was the child that hadn't even been born yet. Give him $500,000 up front. He gets the rest only after he signs a legally binding NDA, testifies on camera, and hands over the original devices. Charles frowned. You're actually going to pay him? I'm not paying for his greed. I'm buying timing. 2 hours later, Preston Cole was escorted through the back entrance of the estate. He was in his 30s, wearing an expensive designer shirt, but his body language screamed anxiety. The moment he saw me, he forced a sleazy smile. Miss Hayes is quite the powerhouse. No wonder the Sterlings are spinning like tops. I didn't offer him a seat. Where's the evidence? He placed an unlocked iPhone on the table. Texts, intimate photos, uncut audio of Brooke telling me the kid is mine. But I need to see the wire transfer first. Charles slid a contract across the table. Sign this. It guarantees the authenticity of the evidence. If you lie, you'll be prosecuted for fraud and extortion. Preston sneered. You think I'm scared of lawyers? I looked at him dead-eyed. If you're not scared of the law, you're scared of losing $2 million. Or maybe you're scared of Brooke turning around and framing you to the press. You know her better than I do, don't you? The smirk wiped off his face. He quickly signed the papers. When Charles hooked up the phone, the texts were even clearer than I expected. Brooke, the baby is yours, but it has to have the Sterling name. Otherwise, we'll both be broke. Forever. In an audio clip, Brooke was laughing. Hunter is so gullible. As long as I cry, he'll do whatever I want. Martha was shaking with rage. I just felt another layer of ice form over my heart. Prep the live broadcast, I told Charles. Right now? She's streaming to 80,000 people. Exactly. It's time the audience got to watch Act 2. 15 minutes later, the official corporate accounts for Providence Holdings went live, issuing a factual rebuttal regarding defamatory claims by Miss Brooke. Newman. I didn't appear on camera. Charles sat at a desk, methodically, presenting the documents, the clinic verifications, the raw text messages, the bank statements. And finally, the recorded video confession of Preston Cole. Sitting in front of the camera, looking pale but speaking clearly, Preston stated, The baby Brooke Newman is carrying is mine. She knew from the Parianjababy beginning. We conspired to pass the child off as Hunter Sterling's because she wanted access to the family wealth. That single sentence turned the tide of the entire internet. Brooke's live stream suddenly went dead silent. A few minutes later, her feed abruptly cut off, but it was too late. Clips were already going viral. The people who had just been cursing my name pivoted to tearing her apart. The accounts that called her a victim were now demanding to know how she could be so sociopathic as to manipulate two men with a pregnancy. I sat in the shadows behind the camera crew, feeling neither joy nor sorrow. Winning a war like this felt like holding a fistful of ashes. It proved the fire happened, but it also reminded you of what had burned down. My phone buzzed. Hunter, I didn't answer. He sent a text. Maya, I saw the broadcast. I truly have nothing left. I stared at those words for a long time, before turning off the screen. Outside, the upstate night was freezing and profound. I pulled my shawl tight and stepped out onto the balcony. Down in the garden, the hydrangeas bloomed, quietly in the dark, heavy with dew. They didn't need apologies. They didn't need anyone to come back. They just needed to survive the cold night so they could keep living. And so did I. The next morning, when I walked into the Providence Holdings regional office in the Hudson Valley, everyone was already seated. Charles, Arthur Sterling, an independent audit team, and 3 corporate restructuring specialists filled the long conference table. On the massive screen was a mind map of Sterling, Enterprise's debt leverage, collateralized assets, and the hemorrhaging projects. I paused at the door for a second, looking at the numbers that had once been the pride of the Sterling family, now turning into a noose around their necks. Surprisingly, I wasn't shaking anymore. Maybe when you survive your greatest trauma, the battles that follow are just chores on a checklist. Arthur slid a thick stack of documents toward me. These are the proxy Authorizations from my voting block. Combined with your shares, you have absolute control over the restructuring agenda. I picked up a pen, the tip hovering over the paper. I suddenly remembered the day I signed my divorce papers. My hand had shaken so badly, my signature was jagged, my heart feeling like it was being crushed in a vice. Today, I was signing my name again, but it wasn't to leave a marriage. It was to reclaim my rightful place in the world. I signed it and put the pen down. From this moment on, all major Sterling transactions are frozen and subject to review. I want a forensic trace on every suspicious expenditure over the last 3 years, especially the PR contracts, linked to Brooke Newman's referrals. Charles nodded. We already found several inflated invoices funneled to Preston, Cole's agency. Arthur slammed his hand on the table, his face dark. Hunter is an absolute idiot. I didn't reply. Idiot was a polite word for arrogant. Hunter wasn't just conned by Brooke. He opened the corporate vault for her. He trusted anyone who stroked his ego and discarded the people who genuinely cared for him. A leader like that, losing his throne was inevitable. The meeting ran through lunch. As everyone was packing up, Martha called my cell. Eleanor Sterling was standing at the gates of the estate, refusing to leave until I saw her. I frowned, but eventually told security to let her in. When she walked into the estate's living room, she possessed none of her former aristocratic arrogance. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen, her designer coat wrinkled. She looked at me, her lips trembling, and suddenly dropped to her knees. Maya, save Hunter. He was wrong, I was wrong, but please don't let him lose everything. He's my only son. I looked down at the woman who had forced me to eat cold leftovers in the kitchen, who had thrown a dress I bought with my own savings into the trash, who told me I was unfit to carry a Sterling child. Now, she was kneeling at my feet. But I felt no vindication. I only realized that some people only know how to bow when their lifelines are cut. When others are suffering, they stand on pedestals. Mrs. Sterling, when I lost my baby, did you ever, for a single second, consider that it was a human life? Eleanor broke down sobbing. I was confused. Brooke blinded me. I was carrying my grandson. No, no one blinded you. You just chose to believe. Whatever benefited you. When I was poor, everything I did was wrong. When Brooke brought a baby you thought was your ticket to an heir, everything she did was right. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking violently. I'm begging you, take the shares, take the company, whatever you want. Just leave Hunter a way out. I stared at her for a long time before speaking. I won't send him to federal prison, provided he cooperates with the financial investigations and pays back every embezzled cent. But he will never sit in an executive chair again. That isn't revenge. That is the price of incompetence and a bankrupt moral character. Eleanor looked up, her eyes full of despair. Do you really have no compassion left in you? I gave a cold, faint smile. My compassion died in your storage closet. It died in the cold dinners I ate alone, and it died on the operating table the day my baby was taken from me. She couldn't speak another word. Martha stepped forward and politely escorted her out. As her shadow disappeared out the door, my phone vibrated with an unknown number. I answered it. Hunter's voice came through, raspy and thick, as if he had been drinking heavily. Maya, my mother went to see you, didn't she? Yes. She bothered me. Again. Silence. For the first time, he didn't defend his mother. Nor did he blame me. He just let out a dry, hollow laugh. I just received the official termination papers. My personal accounts are frozen for the audit. Brooke vanished, and Preston Cole sang like a canary to the feds. I was sitting in my empty office, and I suddenly remembered the thermos of soup you used to bring me. I never finished it. Not even once. I looked out the window at the afternoon sun hitting the hydrangeas. There's no point bringing up the past. I know. I just wanted to say, if there's a next life, don't book me for your next life, I interrupted smoothly. In this life, you still haven't learned how to treat the people standing right next to you. The line was quiet for a long time. Finally, he whispered, Maya, I hope the rest of your life is incredibly peaceful. I hung up without replying. When well wishes come from the person who destroyed They no longer hurt, but they also no longer matter. That night, I stood on the balcony of the Hayes estate, looking out over the, quote, rolling hills of the Hudson Valley. Behind me were stacks of contracts waiting for my signature. Ahead of me was a clear, crisp night sky after a brutal storm. I knew tomorrow was the final board vote that would seal the fate of Sterling Enterprises, and it would also be the day I officially closed the chapter of my life where I had lost myself. The final shareholder meeting of Sterling Enterprises took place on a bright, rainless morning. I walked into the boardroom not as the pitied ex-wife, but as the controlling partner dictating the corporate restructuring. Hunter sat at the sal's far end of the table, staring blankly at the termination agreement and federal cooperation mandate in front of him. He had lost a dramatic amount of weight. His jaw was covered in scruff, his eyes deeply hollowed out. When I walked past him, he looked up. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no resentment, just bone-deep exhaustion and a regret that had come far too late. Arthur Sterling chaired the meeting. Every financial leak was exposed, every fraudulent PR contract tied to Brooke and Preston was brought to the light. I had heard Brooke fled New York in the middle of the night, but she couldn't escape the feds. Charles had handed the extortion and wire fraud evidence straight to the authorities. They said she cried hysterically when she realized no one was coming to bail her out. Hearing that, I felt nothing. I didn't want to be someone who found joy in the suffering of others. I just wanted justice, put back in its proper place. After 3 hours, the board officially voted to terminate Hunter Sterling as CEO. Arthur would act as interim chairman, while I, representing Providence Holdings, took total control of the restructuring committee. When the final tally flashed on the screen, Hunter stared at the table for a long time. Eleanor, sitting in the back row, began to weep, but this time, no one rushed to comfort her. You cannot use tears to extort forgiveness forever. After the meeting adjourned, I walked out into the corridor. Hunter followed me, but he didn't shout like before. He stayed a few paces back, his voice hoarse. Maya, for the rest of your life, will you always hate me? I looked at him. This man used to be my entire youth. He had made me forget my mother's teachings, abandon my grandfather's legacy, and lose my own identity. Yet, strangely, in this final moment, I realized I didn't hate him anymore. Hating someone takes an immense amount of energy. I refused to spend the rest of my life keeping him in my heart under any circumstance. I don't hate you. A weak flicker of hope lit his eyes. Does that mean we... But I also don't love you anymore. The flicker died instantly. I continued, speaking slowly and clearly. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I refuse to let you be an open wound in my life anymore. He stood frozen, his lips trembling, but no words came out. I turned and walked away. This time, he didn't follow. Perhaps he finally understood that once some people walk out of your life, no amount of regret will ever bring them back. 3 months later, Sterling Enterprises was rebranded as Providence Sterling Holdings. I didn't erase its past, but I gutted the toxic executive culture. I kept the competent employees, axed the fraudulent shell projects, and launched a massive philanthropic foundation for women navigating life post-divorce women who had lost children, women who had survived emotional abuse. On the day I signed the foundation's charter, I sat by the window at the Hayes estate for a long time. Down in the garden, the blue and purple hydrangeas were blooming brilliantly under the sun. I placed my hand on my stomach, where a physical wound had healed, though the memory remained. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, I whispered. But I promise, from now on, I will live with all the courage I didn't have back then. Martha stood behind me, quietly wiping a tear from her eye. Charles walked in and placed a new investment portfolio for a Miami beachfront development on my lake desk. He smiled. Miss Hayes, the partners are asking when you'd like to fly down. For the site inspection, I looked at the crystal blue sky outside the window, and for the first time in years, I smiled a genuine, wholehearted smile. Tell them tomorrow. I have a lot of work to do. My life had once been buried alive in a cold, suffocating marriage, but in the end, I clawed my own way out. I didn't become the evil, vindictive monster they tried to paint me as. I simply became a woman who knew her worth, who knew how to fiercely protect her boundaries, and who finally realized that no one has the blink right to make you bow your head just because you made the mistake of loving the wrong person.